So Vivek, thanks for taking our time and agreeing to speak with me. So everyone, Vivek is a very dear friend of ours. And at the same time, apart from being a friend, he's also a very experienced consultant. And he's currently a partner with Talent Tonic HR Solutions. And it's based out of Gurgaon and Singapore as well, right, Vivek?
Yeah,
And
India, Singapore. In India, we have 2, 3 locations.
yeah, yeah. And before joining Talent Tonic HR Solutions, he's worked with Amazon, PwC, and he was also with American Express for a very long time. And he's one of the founding members of a talent-based HR solution firm called Think Talent. And I remember, and I've known you since HCL days, so it's wonderful to always speak with you. But I think the way we are going to converse now virtually, it's very different from how we've interacted before. I can see your work from home, the work desk, and I can clearly see that you're
Yeah,
also
it's my.
not used to working virtually, are you?
I did learn a lot in my earlier stints, but this
Mm-hmm.
one is my daughter's room, and
Okay.
for last several months, of course, I was primarily not working from home. So yeah, I think I need to now relearn the things
Yeah,
that I had learned earlier when I was with maybe Amazon and PricewaterhouseCoopers.
yeah, sure. And the reason I roped you in, Vivek,
Sure.
is this lockdown. It's very, it's once in a lifetime. I'm fingers crossed. It's a once in a lifetime event, and at the same time, there are a lot of meanings that people are drawing from it. And whether it's individuals, whether it's organizations, whether it's the governments, and so on, right? So I thought it'd be a good idea to just talk to someone about it and understand more about what the lockdown really means, what it entails, and especially from the business standpoint. And I just want to make more meaning out of all of this, and then we will come down to what all of this means to environmental sustainability also.
So thanks for actually inviting for this conversation. Wonderful to chat with you in this format and talk about things which are close to your heart. What I would like to talk about is, something from the experience and something what we all are perhaps reading, listening to, in the WhatsApp groups and social media information that is floating. So all of it at times comes to us, and at times we are overwhelmed. At times, it's insightful. At times, it's very, very motivating and inspirational as well. So, what are the 3, 4 buckets in which perhaps I would like to talk? One, of course, is I've been in consulting for some time and been with corporate. So, economy in general is something that is important. And I think some time back, maybe a week back, there was a discussion in which I was participating in LinkedIn, and I shared a comment that it is about lives and livelihood. And I think now when we talk a little bit more about it, the discussion definitely is, and many others were also thinking this on the same lines. It's lives and livelihood. There are various things that's been said about economy in general. uh, a lot of people say that it seems that the world is into a recession.
Mm-hmm.
Some even say that the impact may be more than the financial crisis of 2008.
Right.
Now, those are some, I would say, people have made their analysis and they have arrived at some conclusion. But the fact of the matter is that the conclusion has to be based with some data, which
Mm-hmm.
makes us either believe or question that conclusion.
Right.
So when you look at it, I think one of the data which was quite striking was, I think in the last 2, 3 weeks of March, what we realized was almost, I think 10 million people applied for what we call unemployment benefits in the US.
In the
And I
US,
think
yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
staggering figure. That's a staggering
Mm-hmm.
figure because if my memory serves me right, even at the zenith or height of the financial crisis, I don't think so. It was, I mean, this was the number. Slowdown in manufacturing, definitely manufacturing output is
Mm-hmm.
definitely in many countries is a reality. though we are saying that China is now picking up, of course it may be, but definitely there's a slowdown in manufacturing.
Right.
What it means, definitely it means there's a drop in external demand. It's also about declining in the domestic demand. And
Mm-hmm.
even if China is picking up, the fact of the matter is that if the demand drops in the developed markets
Right.
because of the pandemic, then
Mm-hmm.
definitely, there can be an increased level of production activity in China, but the world
There
is
needs to be.
interconnected, it is linked,
That's true.
and
Yeah.
therefore, so that's I think that's the other part of it. There are a few more things that come to light, and it's typically the behavior of uh, mega industries
Mm-hmm.
in a situation which is born out of fear. And
Right.
one thing I remember was the oil industry. I
Mm-hmm.
think there was this thing of a market contraction that I
Mm-hmm.
think started a kind of a price war amongst OPEC, Russia,
Mm.
shale producers, and of course there was press on the heavily indebted in energy sector. The good thing is that they have now come to some kind of an agreement, so which is a good thing. But we also realize what perhaps it may initiate or start. That's behavior at a larger level. I think the other thing is, anyways, the income is lost.
Right.
What by and large in economy we have to take care is that the consumption is not lost. There's a transfer of money that happens,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that is something which is critical, which is required. India definitely, I mean, 1.3 billion people, huge unorganized sector, um, daily wagers. The size is so huge that we definitely ought to focus on lives and livelihood. It's like a conjoined twins. You can't separate them anymore. Uh, because if that was the case, then we would have seen a very different kind of a scenario. Because they are together. Therefore, I think the new slogan which somebody told me and I was informed about it, जान और जहान दोनों को
Mm-hmm.
साथ लेके चलना है. I think that's a very important thing. That's if you look at it, the
Mm.
power of interconnected. We see that the stock market. I think
Right.
the foreigners. I think they sold around, if I remember correctly, somewhere around $5 billion in 5 days in India, which
Right.
is a huge amount of money. The BSE Sensex, I think, shared somewhere around 30+% in 2020. The
Mm-hmm.
worst fall was around 2,900 points on somewhere around, I think, mid of March. Now, this tells you the magnitude of the crisis with respect to economics around the world coming to India. I mean, in India,
Mm-hmm.
if you talk about the power generation companies, they have expressed they have expressed a need to be supported with what we call easier access to fuel and restructuring of the loans. And if that doesn't happen, then the projects can come to a halt, resulting in huge job losses,
Mm-hmm.
rise in the NPA. So you can see some of those things which have been expressed by some of the people. The last few crises, I think they were more like a V,
Mm.
so the recovery was quick, and that's a positive side in this case. So that's, I think, the economy side of it. By and large, the way I see it, the way the data is talking about from various aspects, uh, and I hope that it's a V shape. That's my sincere hope, because we
Mm-hmm.
don't want a prolonged, recovery.
Yeah.
We don't want a prolonged. But we should prepare for the worst. We should hope for the best. So that's what it
Sure.
is.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
Vivek. And I think the other part is that, I think we were in a hyper globalized um, um, way of working, right? All the businesses are interconnected. And so post the pandemic, so how do you see that? Do you think we are going to get localized now? Um, we did talk about it previously also, I
See,
mean,
we
offline.
did, and
Mm.
I think you and I, when we started our work, maybe early 2000, there was a lot of this globalization thing. The world is fat, Tom Friedman, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
We were also the beneficiary of it. I
Yeah.
must say that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, of late, definitely, we realized that there were questions around this model. There was a talk around protectionism, the walls going up, talk about keeping the jobs and the industry more inward. All of that was happening in the past. So there was a world which was like a design studio in Italy, a delivery center in India, a manufacturing hub in China, and the whole world is your market, perhaps in the US or in the Europe. I think that definitely was questioned earlier as well. And with this pandemic, definitely, it will, the questions around it will get expedited.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I see that there are reasons for it. The reasons being that, you may have thought that we'll be able to reap benefits out of it in some shape or form. But when there is a choice of keeping the business running versus incurring some amount of extra costs in some shape or form, the business would always say that, it's okay to have some amount of costs going up, but I want to keep the business running.
Business, yeah.
So lean, mean organization versus keeping the business steady and running. If that's the trade-off, most of the businesses will go for the businesses to be up and running. And then
Yeah.
there are other dimensions to it, like the political aspects coming into play, where the idea is to keep things more inward, which we have been
Mm-hmm.
experiencing for some time. But definitely, this will get a fillip. This whole idea will get definitely a big fillip because of this. What I also see is that definitely, crises have taught us that the consumer behavior, which is a very strong part of the way businesses work, also undergoes a change. Now, some of it may go a permanent change, some of it may go a temporary change. So the much talked about case is about the 2003 SARS, which says, people say that it led to a boom in the online shopping in China. I think that's one of the most talked about cases these days. There are other cases also which bolsters our belief in this phenomena, that crisis shapes new behaviors permanently or temporarily, we don't know.
Actually, a lot of people are also looking at it from at this particular time as maybe a portal, or we always keep talking about change is coming. Be ready for it, and I think this lingo is very prevalent in the corporate sector, that you need to be ready for change, and these are the things that you can do, and you need to be agile. But a lot of people also think that this is the change. So if you can show agility now, you will be in the
Hmm.
game. So what does that mean? We can definitely see that at an employee level. And also, I think the most relevant and the simplest example is how we're seeing people working from home, even for organizations that felt that it wouldn't be possible, right? Even they're
Hmm.
now reconsidering this option. What are your thoughts on that?
One thing that we realized was that we love the idea of absolutism. This thing of there's an absolute solution to it, and I think everywhere it happens, because we are from corporates. At least we see a lot more in corporates, but that's because that's a large part of our world. So there was a time when organizations believed that their duty is only towards the stakeholders, and anything
Mm-hmm.
else other than that was a blasphemy. And a lot of ways of doing business and what is right was shaped by that thought, and it was kind of an absolute idea. That's the absolute truth, and nobody could question it. Similarly, there came a time, and because I am from leadership, talent, and culture world, I know that there was this whole thing around bell curve, and the bell curve is the best thing for boosting the performance. And it was like
Mm-hmm.
the absolute idea. And then over a period of time, you realize that perhaps that's not the best idea, or there are
Mm-hmm.
alternatives to it. And what is it? We are still trying to figure out. So this absolutism in thinking has always been there. What we have realized, and what nature always makes us realize, is that in manifestation there's nothing that is absolute. Okay. so so again, when we look, and I'm coming back to now the business part of it, that again, when we look at these things, you may think that certain things are there and they will be the absolute truths, but we have to see the way the context emerges. So one thing is in business, let me give you an example of the cash reserves. I remember that some time back, a lot of companies, and especially in the IT world, the companies were being questioned that why do they have that much of cash reserve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was not looked in a very positive way. There were questions that were asked. And of course, everything is contextual, and nothing in nature is absolute. So now we are here, and here the question is that the ones that are good in cash reserves are the ones which perhaps will work well and will be able to survive. So now, the equation has
It is.
changed completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so what we have to realize is that what we are discussing even now and what will emerge out of it may have its value, and definitely it has its value, but that's again not to be taken in an absolute sense. Right now, when we are also looking at some of the consumer behaviors, perhaps some of it will be more permanent and some of it will be transitory.
Mm-hmm.
I still believe that you have to look at it from an angle of there's always the other side to it, which perhaps it's not visible at this point in time. There's a beauty, it
Mm.
is an opportunity to realize maybe two opposing perspectives. There was this perspective of people, maybe in certain industry at certain levels, that their work can never happen virtually. Their
Correct.
work can only happen when people are physically there. And I think this pandemic forced them to adopt a new behavior and realize that even their work can happen virtually and can happen very well, I must say.
Yeah, we're also seeing people in the public sector, working from home. So
Exactly,
that's new. I mean,
exactly.
that's
And
unheard
you
of.
know why I,
So, I'm glad that you mentioned nature. And, we're talking about balance here because through these days, it's only been, about 3 weeks now. And we're seeing nature coming back with all its glory, right? We see the rivers are cleaning up on their own despite thousands and thousands of crores being spent on them over the years. And then we're seeing that animals are reclaiming their places and dolphins coming back and so on, right? So before the pandemic, there was a lot of focus on ecology, climate change. And we were talking about this the other day also, when Davos was all about, climate this time, and ecology, and how to come up with models where it's not just the stakeholders and the consumers and the business, but, there's ecology also, bringing everything together and then moving forward. So uh, now here is a place where we are talking about essentials and non-essentials. We're talking about bringing back the economy. We're talking about livelihood and lives. So in all of this, where does environmental sustainability fit in? Do you think
that's
the whole focus on it is going to get watered down, or do you think there would be renewed focus on it because we're seeing it's possible to reverse the effects of human activity? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's an interesting conversation to so to say.
Mm.
I I think that and you are one of those who's taken it very seriously and started a startup, left your job, and you are into a startup now into sustainability. But what you'd see is that sustainability has many dimensions to it.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the sustainable development goals, you have public health, you have
Yeah.
uh, many other climate, you have biodiversity. So there are many things in that. Now at this point in time, the pandemic has forced us to perhaps look at one dimension, which is public health, in a very, very concerted manner, because the impact is huge to
Yeah.
humanity. But when you look at sustainability altogether, there are many dimensions, and then the question is that how much resources and effort in a consistent manner can be put into a
Mm-hmm.
particular area, right? And this is a question which has also been raised, that a pandemic can create a situation where you can take a quick decision of saying all activities will almost come to a halt, because the immediate, in terms of causality, the effect is here right now in front of you, and the magnitude is huge. Even today, I think when I was looking at the numbers, in India there are 9,000 plus people who've been tested positive, or so that's a huge number. Globally, it's a huge number. Does sustainability, and especially the part that you're talking about, climate, occupy that kind of mind space and energy? Because the causality, in the causality chain, whatever happens is too far away, and there are very many variables that come together to eventually uh, you know make you realize that the scenarios can be catastrophic. So for example, when Ebola happened, and Bill Gates, if I remember correctly, said this, that I think this happened in West Africa, and had it happened in another country which was more populated, the results would have been extremely bad. And this transmission was a fluid based transmission, but if there was other ways of transmitting it, it can really be a killer. But had even after all of that, did it occupy that kind of a space in the minds of the people? Questionable. I think the efforts have gone up, but to the extent it should be, I don't know. I don't think so in the climate case. And
Mm-hmm.
frankly speaking, that's not one part with them. There are many elements which are interlinked, and at times they are paradoxical. Uh, one impacts the other. For example, very recently, in just 5 minutes back, we were talking about the global supply chain and its impact.
Right.
Now, if you look at it, China dominates the global solar panel market. Okay. Now, if the supply chains are disrupted because of, let's say, right now, Corona, that will pose serious problems to countries like India, because I believe that India imports around 80% of its panel from China. So
Mm-hmm.
immediately, there is a part, and this is the beauty when you look at systems thinking and
Yeah.
systemic way of thinking, that one is linked to the other. Here you are trying to do something in a country like India, trying to do something in the area of renewables or climate,
Yeah.
and you are
Mm-hmm.
looking for global solar panels, and suddenly there is this global supply chain which allows that to happen, and suddenly there is a break in the supply chain, and everything stops. Now that's one, but that's not all. At times, things are paradoxical, in a sense that you don't know how to resolve this puzzle, because here you are making efforts to make it more climate friendly solutions, and while you are making efforts here, the other side of it is actually pulling it down. And the example that I can think of is electric cars, which requires batteries, and
Right.
an important component of batteries, I think, is cobalt.
Yeah.
And
Which
if
is
you look at
extracted
it,
from,
you know
yeah. The extraction
it's, yeah,
process
you're right.
is
Yeah,
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 quite
yeah.
intensive.
I mean, they're called blood diamonds of batteries. I
Mm-hmm.
think around three-fourths of the world's cobalt would come from Congo, and a large percentage of production that takes place in certain kind of mines where you have very poor environmental standards and labor safety records. So, look at it from this angle, that the problem is or the situation, not say problem, the situation of climate sustainability has many components and dimensions to it. And one has to realize that if you really want to move forward in this direction, it cannot be that we will solve a problem here and it will get resolved. You have to again go back to nature and realize that ecology tells you everything is interconnected. So it demands a concerted effort, long term, not a very immediate kind of solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, to answer your question, I think I talked about a lot of things, perhaps digressed also, but I
So,
think it's not a one shot solution, and it's
mm-hmm.
not something that can happen instantly.
Mm.
Some behaviors may get triggered, and we welcome those behaviors here, but we should not be happy just because some behaviors which are favorable that are triggered. It requires a very deep, long term, connected,
Mm.
concerted effort, and to see we are making things happen here. Is it really favorable overall to the climate thing, or making things happen here is actually creating problems for the climate there, which is example of the cobalt thing which I shared with you. Two
Right.
things: keeping the engines running with an inward focus.
Mm-hmm.
See, when countries walk out of great climate deals, they walk out because they realize that their own countries are not getting the benefit. Now that behavior of inward looking will get magnified
Right.
because of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I hope so it doesn't happen, but the possibility of the casualty of climate side, that
Mm-hmm.
possibility exists.
When we talk about globalization, or the biggest contributors to climate is the carbon footprint, and which is transportation. So like you said, everything is interconnected. So I think it may not happen at an overt level as of now, but we may see some changes, also behavioral changes, like at very personal level, people, where people have started talking about, going only with what is needed. They're, the consumption is less, and then they can live with less. So we just might see, consumer behavior driven changes in industries. So let's see
True, true, and I
the
hope
entire
so.
thing
Some of these
unfolds.
things, if even a small percentage changes, for example, staying inside, working from home,
Yeah.
even things like the food habits of people has changed. And if
Mm-hmm.
the food habits of people change, there's a lot of pollution that happens in a certain kind of food industry. And if you make a certain
It's
kind of shift in
packaging. It's
your food
clearly
habits,
packaging. Yeah. Yeah.
that also has a huge impact on climate sustainability and
Yeah.
things which you really value. We should value, but we perhaps don't. But we should really value. So yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
I'm saying it to you,
We
the
can only
person
be
who's
optimists.
walked out
I
of
can be
this.
an optimist and hope for the best to happen.
Me
Um,
too. Me too.
yeah.
And I think the good thing is that people like you have walked out of their careers and now making an impact by saying that let's create a business around sustainability. Right? That's a big change. Individual level, that's a big change.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think the one thing which I would definitely like to comment is, and this is a topic which is close to me, and it then impacts, a lot of things the way we are experiencing it, and perhaps we'll experience it once we'll cross this uh, pandemic. We're out of it. I think one thing is this whole thing of what we call, leadership, and we have seen some great examples of leadership and not so great examples of leadership, which then again boils down to what you value inherently, and therefore you are able to take certain calls at certain point in time. Some of the world leaders who are responsible for leading their countries at times in this time of crisis, some of them have been fairly being questioned by a lot of people for various reasons, and some have really come out like they are the captain of the ship. So I think the case, whether it's big business, economy, politics, country, it all boils down to the core is fundamentally what is the nature of leadership that is there and the quality of leaders that are guiding. And I think what you need at this point in time is, frankly speaking, some days back I did a very short qualitative survey kind of a thing on LinkedIn, and I said that, tell me the qualities of leadership which are required when we face a crisis, and tell me not from any books or from any article, tell me from your own experience. And some very interesting points came out. I think uh, I would like to share with you that what came out, and if I summarize it, I think they came
Yeah.
in pairs. The pairs are something like, decisive and creative. That's one pair. Leader has to be decisive and leader also has to be creative. Resilient and positive. I mean, you may say that resilient includes positive, but to bounce back and to bounce back with a lot of positivity. I think that's the second pair that came up. The third pair that came up was open and communicative. So one has to be open at this point in time, and a lot of channels and right ways of communication. And I think the last that came out was empathetic and honest. I think if these are the qualities that you display, I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things can happen. For example, I remember when we were having a conversation, there are a lot of leaders in the West that were being praised
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. But this time, if you see Bolsonaro in Brazil,
Yeah.
uh, people have questioned, right? Whereas our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, in all fairness, you can see that he's been there like the captain of the ship. But that's an interesting thing. It also brings us back that when a nation or a culture rises, it has many ramifications. So somebody was telling me that some old serials like Ramayana are back on
Yeah.
Doordarshan, and yeah, there's part of it that they're back. But imagine the Brazil president Bolsonaro saying that, just like Lord Hanumana brought the holy medicine from the Himalayas to save, similarly, Brazil and India should partner. Now imagine somebody who's there, he's talking about an Indian epic in this light. It talks about,
The
you
impact
can
and
look
the
at it from
reach.
various perspectives, but
Yeah,
can you
yeah,
look at the impact?
yeah.
So whether it's economics, climate, sustainability, business, it all boils down to that core set of people who are the leaders, and what's their character and their resolve, and can they take it forward or not. I think that's and
Mm-hmm.
perhaps I am kind of also a bit biased because that's also my subject, so I say that so vociferously,
No, I'm
and
glad
you
that you
know
did talk about it today, because I know that you are extremely passionate about leadership, and that is your work. So I'm glad that you brought it up. Yeah. All right, Vivek. So that was interesting. It gave me a lot of ideas. Because from when we a lot of times, when we a part of what people who get into aspects like I'm into, we are more or less active advocates slash activists, so we don't know when we cross the line, and most of it is we're just charged with emotions, and we only see the black and the white, we don't see the grays. So you helped me see the grays today, and I really wanted
no
to
no no
understand um, what
no.
does this pandemic really mean from a business standpoint, and if we have to bring environmental sustainability and the business together, what is the story right now, or what could be the potential story? Because for me, my link to the world, and that's the case for everyone, it's the news, or it's social media, it's your WhatsApp messages and so on, and everything has, and all of these platforms have been painting a lot of rosy picture when it comes to the environment, and when it comes to people realizing that at a personal level. So I just wanted to do a reality check, and thanks for that. Thanks so much, Vivek. Thank you for your time. It was wonderful talking to you, like always.
Thank
And
you very
once the
much, and I
lockdown is
appreciate
over, yeah, we should also catch up in person. Okay.
in person. Yeah, in person.
In
Though this
person.
was a good experience,
Yeah.
at times it got disrupted, but I think there's no replacement of talking face to face. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. All right.
All right.
Thanks,
Okay then.
Vivek.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.